Nearly 300 doctors and scientists sign an open letter to Spotify calling for it to stop Joe Rogan from spreading anti-vax misinformation after he hosted controversial Dr. Robert Malone. I wonder, why is Dr. Robert Malone controversial? I love this idea. They say Ben Shapiro is controversial. They've called me controversial. Why? Is it because we're anti-establishment? Is that what it means? You will be controversial unless you just toe the line for the corporate press and the uniparty establishment, political establishment. You're controversial when you challenge the norms, right? Because we'll put it this way. Dr. Fauci, is he controversial? The media will not call Dr. Fauci controversial. You see how the game is played? It is not science when you silence dissent. Sorry. When all of these Democrat types come out and say, trust the science, I say, okay, that includes dissenting opinions. Because have we learned nothing from history? Galileo? Yeah, we're supposed to say, okay, well, dissenting voices could be wrong, and we should question why they are a dissenting voice. We should ask them questions and keep it in mind. That's the point of science, to acknowledge that we could be wrong. So now Joe Rogan once again is under fire. Not that I think it matters, because Joe moved to Spotify, not just for the money, but also because it gives him some freedom. Now, let's be real. Joe Rogan has removed many episodes of his show. He said this was, I believe he said this was, there was an uploading error on YouTube. They weren't able to save the archives. And I don't know if I buy that explanation. I mean, look, I consider Joe a friend. I've been on a show several times. He's a really good dude, one of the most important guys in the culture war, one of the most honest. And I feel it's important to point out that you've always got to make sure you highlight bad things and criticize people, no matter who they are. But I genuinely trust Joe Rogan. I think he's doing a good job. He's clearly, in my opinion, not doing this for clout or money. The dude's already famous. He's been famous for a long time. So when I hear that certain episodes got removed, I'm not happy with it, but I trust he's doing the best he can to try and keep these conversations going. Because let's be honest, Joe had on Dr. Robert Malone. He had on Peter McCullough. These are dissenting voices, and for it, he's taking serious flack. Now, there's more to me just talking about Joe Rogan and these doctors. There's also a bunch of people saying, Tim, you have to respond to the Joe Rogan podcast yesterday. Joe Rogan hosted Josh Zepps, a podcaster and presenter from Australia, who I think he insulted me. I guess he insulted my intelligence. He tried referring to me as alt-right, somewhat indirectly, and Joe pushed back. He's like, come on, you can't do that. And, you know, I've had people hitting me up being like, yo, this dude was insulting you. And they gave Majid Nawaz a pass. And Majid's fantastic, by the way. But it's like, Majid and I have very similar opinions on what's happening in Australia. That's who this guy is. And he appears in the Joe Rogan podcast. And he pushes a distorted view of what I've said. And in my opinion, it's very much state propaganda. So I'll just say immediately to those who've seen the episode, my response right away is, people are allowed to call me whatever they want. They're allowed to criticize me. They can take what I say and say it's bad and wrong. I got no problem with that. And I will also add, I absolutely love when Joe Rogan was like, are you state propaganda? Like, you're just dismissive of anything critical of the state. It was actually really, really funny. And I respect that. And I'll also point out, too, the guy, Josh, on the show, he's like, I've invited Tim on my podcast. Why won't he come? And I love this explanation, this attempt at being like, why won't Tim come on my show? It's like, yo, I work 16-hour days. I work morning shows and night shows. And we've invited you, Josh, onto our show. I know it's kind of silly. It's kind of dumb. Like, making you come onto my show. I won't go on yours. I totally get that. Here's what I've said of like the Young Turks, Kyle Kalinske. I don't fault them for not coming on my show. They host their own shows. Why won't Hassan come on Timcast IRL? He's a prominent, for those aren't familiar, he's a very prominent left-wing personality. He hosts his own show. He's got work to do. And so I get it. Now, if Josh, wants to claim I said things that I didn't say, or take obvious trolling Twitter posts and try and act like they're real, well, good on you, I guess, but you're welcome to come on our show, and you're welcome to come on anytime, because I am not hiding from any debate or conversation. But let's get into this. First, I want to talk about what's going on with these doctors and Joe Rogan, and this is really, really important, man. I got to tell you, This episode with Robert Malone and the episode with Peter McCullough, I hope you guys realize how lucky we are that someone like Joe Rogan exists and is willing to put his career on the line and everything to have these conversations. And I just want to stress that point, man. For all the criticisms and I think important things to bring up, I want to make sure you realize there's a meme going around where they're like, all it took was a comedian hosting a doctor for people to finally break the narrative and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, dude, we're lucky. I couldn't imagine how we're lucky we got people like Joe, to be completely honest, man. He's a good dude. I will say before we read this, go to timcast.com, support our work. If you haven't already, become a member. We've got members only episodes. I wish we could just put up for free, to be completely honest. I wish we could have these. We produced Timcast IRL conversations for a year or so, and the conversations I've done here. But as censorship is getting worse, we needed to create our own space. How do we support a website with bandwidth costs? Well, we make a membership thing. So we're going to be working on getting some of these uncensored episodes up on Sunday nights for Timcast IRL, iTunes, and Spotify. We call it Sunday Uncensored because I want people to know this stuff. It's not about money, man. We do need to cover our costs. We do want to hire more journalists. We do want to fight the fight, and money helps us do that. Here's the story from the Daily Mail. Hundreds of doctors and scientists have signed an open letter to Spotify accusing Joe Rogan of pushing anti-vax misinformation. A total of 270 experts and medical professionals called on the streaming giant to adopt a misinformation policy after the comedian hosted the controversial Dr. Robert Malone last month. No, they should. Now, do they have the letter in here? They mentioned he was suspended and all that stuff. Where's the open letter? I want to see. Okay, they didn't actually post it. But we will read on a misinformation policy, they say. During a 3-hour and 6-minute interview on the now viral episode 1757, Malone compared the U.S. to Nazi Germany and said, today's society was suffering from a mass formation psychosis over the use of vaccines. That is demonstrably false. What he said was that mass formation psychosis has more to do with our reactions, COVID policy, mandates, etc., not vaccines. Dr. Robert Malone is vaccinated. I think he may be boosted as well. They say he also claimed to be part of the team that invented mRNA technology used in the COVID-19 jab and said pharmaceutical companies administering the vaccines, such as Pfizer and Moderna, have financial conflicts of interest. He's correct. He's 100% correct. Even in the smear pieces against him, they point out he is the guy who first, I don't know what the right word is. He said, hey, how about, you know that thing? So here, let me say it like this. The thing that mRNA vaccines do, transmitting genetic information through lipids into cells. That was Dr. Robert Malone who came up with that. Now, you can argue he didn't invent the vaccines themselves, just the precursor ideas of how it could work. Is that not inventing it? I don't know. I guess, the first light bulb wasn't actually inventing the light bulb because it wasn't good enough and it didn't actually get sold on markets. No, and someone said, here's a vacuum tube and we put metal in it. It's illuminated or whatever. Well, okay. I don't know. I got to be honest. I'm not an electrician or an engineer. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know everything about light bulbs. Hundreds of medical professionals have fact-checked Malone and demanded accountability from Spotify. Why? They wrote, with an estimated 11 million listeners per episode, bravo, Joe. JRE, which is hosted exclusively on Spotify, is the world's largest podcast and has tremendous influence. You're sure? You're damn right. Spotify has a responsibility to mitigate the spread of misinformation on its platform, though the company presently has no misinformation policy. The reason why I wanted to highlight this, not just because it's an excuse for me to respond to what the guy said on me on the show. It's not really about that. No, this is important because Joe Rogan hosted Sanjay Gupta of CNN, the most mainstream of voices when it comes to these things. It is not just that Joe is hosting only one crackpot who's going around saying the moon's made of cheese. No, it's Dr. Robert Malone, a well-spoken PhD scientist who disagrees. And he's allowed to. And we need that debate. He also hosted Sanjay Gupta. I mean, I'm sure he'd have Fauci on. Of course he would. Joe Rogan hosts so many mainstream personalities. He has a couple guys who dissent and everyone's freaking out. But I don't care about these scientists and doctors and their stupid opinions. The point is, what you need to realize, if we are a society whose media apparatus does not allow dissent, we are doomed. Someone comes out and they say the sky is falling. And everybody on TV says, don't allow it. Don't allow him to say this stuff. Get him out of here. We don't want to hear it. And what if the sky really is falling? Obviously, I don't think the sky is falling, but it's a reference to Chicken Little, right? Somebody comes out and says, I object, and here's why. We should say, okay, let's have a conversation about this. Let's assess what you are saying. If you do not allow a diversity of opinion, you homogenize, you crumble. So I'm kind of worried. Look, Joe Rogan's massive, but Joe's not planting this. Well, I'll say this. Joe is not setting up organizations to preserve his voice. Like, Joe's got all this money. He could hire people and create a media organization. He's doing comedy stuff, which is fantastic. I'm not saying Joe is obligated to do this. I'm just saying if the best chance at dissenting opinion we have, the best opportunity is just one podcast, yikes, we're in trouble. Look, man, I'll be honest with you guys. Many of you may be saying, but Tim, you do that. We do. And it's fair to point out a lot of people are like, how did Tim Pool get so popular? And they're like, Joe Rogan's had him on the show several times. And that is true, too. A lot of people are like, Tim, I first heard of you because of Joe Rogan. So in that sense, Joe allowing these voices does help create, similar voices to grow and flourish. And we now have a very big show at Timcast IRL. But let me just be real with you guys. How many views does Timcast IRL get per episode? We can play a lot of games. I don't know how Joe Rogan does his metrics, but Spotify says that Joe Rogan gets 11 million views per episode. Wow. 11 million. That is huge. Tucker Carlson only gets like 3. And I'd be willing to bet that Joe Rogan's audience are primarily the key demo. All right. I'll give you guys metrics. You can look a lot of this stuff up, but I'll give you metrics. Live viewership on Timcast IRL in the 2-hour span we're live is typically, over the past year, about 200 to 300,000 people. Unique individuals. It's a lot of people. That's great, right? The video on demand views that we get after about, 3 or 4 days. Podcasts go by they're tracked by 90 days because people listen, it's on demand stuff. It's not live, right? We average probably 400,000 over the past couple of weeks. Last year, it may have been like 300, 350. Last year was low for us. The year prior was massive. But I would say all in all, our show gets maybe like 500 to 700,000 viewers. According to our podcast analytics, we have about 750,000, close to 800,000 unique listeners. 800,000. We get around, I think we get like 100K podcast downloads on like iTunes, Spotify, and all those platforms. 100K. Joe Rogan gets 11 million. So we are getting a very, very small amount relative to what Joe is getting on his podcast because it's an exponential gain. When your show is one of the highest ranking shows, you'll get almost all of the viewers because when they open up the podcast app, you're front and center. That benefits Joe to a great degree, for sure. He's the biggest podcast, so he gets that top of the mountain position, and people see him more. For us, I think our podcast ranking is like 160 in the world, which is like, wow, it's really good, but it's an exponential growth. So that being said, to all the people who are fans of this show, a lot of people don't know who we are. We may have a couple million subscribers across the board. I think ultimately unique viewership unique subscribership is the important way to put it. A couple million. And then unique viewership is actually more than that because we have a lot of people who don't subscribe who watch the show. I think our unique viewership might be like 8 million to like 12 million per month or something. Our total viewership across the board with replays and segments and everything is actually closer to like 50 or 60 million. But Joe Rogan's is like 200 plus and CNN's like 100. So all that's really, really important context. And I don't know, for many of you may not care about those numbers, but I'll just say, it's really annoying to me trying to find out metrics on other shows, and they don't release a lot of these numbers, and you're trying to understand how the system works. You're trying to get as much information as possible on it. So there's some information on our show. Maybe that helps or whatever. It's a fairly big show, I guess. I mean, maybe I don't really think about viewership in that sense. I don't look at the episodes and I go like, yes, we got more views, or like, no, we got very few. People tell me, they're like, man, your show's so big. And I'm just like, I don't know. I have no idea. It's crazy though. I'll tell you this. when Joe used to do live streams, when I went on Joe's show live, he had like 30 something thousand live viewers. We get more than that concurrent viewers, but we get substantially less in the overall viewership of the podcast. So maybe we should be doing marketing or something. We don't do any marketing or any promotion. But, shout out to Joe for having me on his show several times. It really did help. But I think it's important to point out, Joe has a lot of people on his show. They don't get as much growth. They don't grow, they don't get as big of a boost. So I think merit does play a role. Now let's do this. Let me point out something from Joe Rogan's show the other day. Hey, this is really cool. The 1762 with Josh Zepps, a broadcaster who hosts Afternoon with Josh Zepps on ABC Radio. That's in Australia. Here's something really cool. Joe Rogan, when you go to his Spotify, it says, you might also like Timcast IRL. Hey, that's cool. And Tim Dillon with Lex Friedman. Wow, Tim Dillon with Lex Friedman. Tim Dillon's podcast his podcast is higher ranking than ours. But I think for us, what makes our show so big is the YouTube audience. Because I know that some of the top podcasts in the world, no, seriously, like the top 10, only get 300,000 downloads per episode. Joe getting 11 million is something unique. No joke. Like, I don't want to say who, but I know a lot of metrics for a lot of big shows. And like some of the shows that are like ranked in the top 10 are only getting like 300,000. That's why I was saying it's like an exponential growth. Once you get way up to the top, like number 1, 2, and 3, it's just like skyrocketing in views. Now, anyway, I digress. In this episode with mainstream corporate establishment state propagandist Josh Zepps, who, look, you want to call me stupid or whatever, I'm going to say the same. I'm going to criticize you, but we absolutely are welcoming Josh to come on Timcast IRL and have these conversations. He said that I'm causing problems in Australia by screaming concentration camps. Let me just point something out. Josh is wrong and he's a state propagandist. Okay. Here's the Wall Street Journal opinion. Coercion made the pandemic worse. In the Wall Street Journal, they write, consider Australia, until recently a relatively free country. Its Northern Territory has a COVID quarantine camp in Howard Springs where law-abiding citizens can be forcibly sent if they have been exposed to COVID, to a COVID-positive person, or have traveled internationally or between states, even without evidence of exposure. 26-year-old Australian citizen Hayley Hodgson was detained at the camp after she was exposed to someone later found to be positive. Despite 3 negative tests and no positive ones, she was held in a small enclosed area for 14 days. She was threatened with fines if she tried to leave. She filmed all of this. It's reality. We have many stories. Let me see. Do I have this one pulled up? Here's Hayley Hodgson explaining what's going on. Here's a video right now of the police arresting an older woman. This is from OCN. Queensland, reportedly Hervey Bay, arrested for not revealing her vaccination status. And then, of course, we have Avi Yemeni. Breaking. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the vaccine does not stop the spread of Omicron. Any court challenge to a vaccine mandate as of today should win. Just subpoena the PM as a witness. Haha. We have other stories. People escaping the quarantine camps. And what have I called them? Literally? Internment camps. Now, I have tweeted * concentration camp. That's called hyperbole. I've stated this. I've said, obviously, I'm poking fun and deriding them and mocking them. But I think it's a good out for people like Josh Zepps and state propagandists. He says on the Joe Rogan podcast, we're trying to have a conversation with people in our country about what's a little too far and what we shouldn't be doing. And people like Tim Pool make it all worse. What? People in Australia aren't watching my show, dude. I know this because I have the metrics. Although there are some people in Australia, it's like 8,000 of our viewers are Australian. So no, we don't have any large viewership in Australia. No, what they found is an excuse to defend the state and their internment camps by saying, look how crazy that is. We don't have concentration camps, right? Tim Pool is crazy. He goes on Joe Rogan's show and says alt-right people are saying these things. And Joe's like, Tim Pool's not alt-right. You can't just do that. Yeah, that's the dirty game they play. We get it. Quillette. They have long masqueraded as intellectual dark web, but they are state propagandists. They have defended the expansion of camps where people can be taken without due process. This woman, Hayley Hodgson, said she was told she was being punished for lying to the police. Now, of course, this guy likes to say, it's just Melbourne where people are really, faced with the lockdowns. Yes, we've talked about that. Many people who are Australian who I've talked with say it's really bad. And I think, what state is that, Victoria? In the show, Joe responds and he says, of me, I don't think he's talking to people who are actually in Australia, which is unfortunate. That's not true. Absolutely not true. For one, I follow Avi Yemeni. You may know who he is. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend just following Avi is the best way to understand Australia. He's covering a certain aspect of what's going on and showing a lot of really awful things. I have friends in Australia. There are people I have known for 10 years. And I don't just come out and say, I have no idea what's going on in Australia, but I'm going to say it's bad. First of all, I have the Wall Street Journal. I have mainstream Australian news sources. Hey, the news source that Josh Zepp works for, ABC, reporting that 3 people tried to escape the quarantine facility. Doesn't sound like an international arrival bungalow, eh, Josh? He's the guy who lied, remember? No, it's just for international arrivals. Now we know he lied. It's not true. Okay, maybe he didn't lie. He's just propagandizing for the state. They've started detaining their own citizens, which is what I said. The Holocaust Museum states that a concentration camp is different from standard prisons because people are taken there without due process. Okay. Obviously, I'm trying to poke at Australia when I say that. But as I stated since the beginning, of course it's hyperbole. I consider them to be internment camps because there's no due process. But I will say this. People in Australia, for the most part, don't watch the show. Some do, for sure, but we're not getting like millions of people from Australia watching the show. It's just not reality. And the conversation about Australia is not for Australia. When I bring up what they're doing, it's for America. It's for us to point out why we should never tolerate these camps. Because I was correct about everything. Concentration camp is hyperbole and it's an opinion. You can't fact check against that. It's just, you can say, Tim, you're dumb, don't call it that. Okay, I can respect that 100%. You're allowed to criticize me. But what I did say was, it's only a matter of time before Australia starts detaining its own citizens, not international arrivals. And Josh Sepp says, that's wrong. It won't happen. They're just international arrival bungalows. And then Haley Hodgson is taken from her home, and she's told that it's punishment for lying to police. Despite the negative tests, as the Wall Street Journal reports, and again, this is an opinion article, she was taken without being criminally charged and without evidence. Should the state be allowed to take people from their homes to imprison them? And I mean that in the literal sense, not like she's been formally incarcerated. No, they kidnap you, whatever you want to call it. Someone takes you against your will by force and doesn't allow you to leave. Should they be allowed to do that without evidence and without due process? To me, I think the answer is an overwhelming no. But here's the point. Let me bring this all full circle. Of course, I want to address misinformation presented about me specifically, and I want to highlight what's going on in Australia because I think it's important. But the point is that Joe Rogan is willing to have state propagandists on his show. And in fact, I'd be willing to bet if you went through all of his guests, most of them, or I should say there are more state propagandists and establishment shills than counterculture individuals and dissenting scientists. So when Joe has on Dr. Robert Malone, I say, bravo, good sir. When he has on Sanjay Gupta, I say, absolutely, bravo, good sir. And you know what? Joe Rogan had on me several times, more so than he's had on Josh Zepps. So I think it's fantastic that Joe has had Josh Zepps on his show. Let people hear what Josh has to say. And you know what? If there are people who follow me and they're fans of me and Joe Rogan, I need not worry about addressing anything, to be honest. Because when Josh does his impersonation of me, he's like, and then you get Tim Pool going, yeah, they're concentration camps, yeah. And Joe goes, is that how he sounds on Twitter? The people who follow me, you guys, who also watch Joe Rogan, are going to be like, that doesn't sound like the guy Tim Pool I just watched on Joe Rogan's show. He sounded more calm and collected than that. Probably. So I think it's good that people can hear all of this stuff. I am not one of these Brian Stelter types who tells you, don't look up at the sky when the meteor is coming. No, I'm the person who says, I actually think it's really important you go watch that episode and hear what he has to say. I think he's wrong. I think I've made my case. If you don't agree with me and I am wrong, well then, so be it. I deserve to fail. I deserve to lose. I believe in meritocracy. So by all means, hear him out. But I think most of you probably agree with me, and that's why you're listening to this show. I think there's a decent amount of people who watch Joe Rogan who are in the know and do research. And here's what I find fascinating. The people who tend not to like my show fall into two camps. They are either tribal left, and so they just don't like me because they disagree with my liberty-minded positions. They think people should be forced to do things, should be forced to be vaccinated, and don't like that. And there are people who just don't know because they don't actually follow the news. They may only be getting their news from like CNN or MSNBC. So when I come out and say something like, there is evidence, and there is a sworn statement from Viktor Shokin, the prosecutor in Ukraine, that he was fired by the president because Joe Biden intervened, and this obstructed an investigation into Burisma, where Joe Biden's son had been on the board. There is evidence supporting all of that. And then I would say the evidence suggests Joe Biden intervened to protect his personal interests because he and Hunter Biden share bank accounts, and Hunter Biden was getting $83,000 a month. Now, if you're someone on the left and you're only watching CNN, you don't know that stuff. And it's my friends' parents and their families, and they're like, I didn't know that. Yeah. Well, I do the research. And you guys were watching, you do too. That's why so many people who watch Timcast IRL are correcting us and saying, hey, you guys got this wrong. And we read the comments, say, okay, because we're just people like you. I read the news a whole lot. I do fact checking, but I'm not the smartest person in the world. I don't know everything. So I just try to fact check. When the Wall Street Journal can report definitively that there are camps in Australia where people are being taken and held without evidence and due process, what would you call that, Josh? You were wrong. They're not international arrival bungalows. There's something worse. And of course, I don't see any reason why Australia will pull back from this. And I know for a fact people don't watch my show in Australia to a great degree. So his excuse that it's making the conversation harder for him is complete BS. No, it's making it easier for you, to be honest. And so that's a fair point, actually. Maybe I shouldn't be coming out and saying it's the worst possible outcome, because then people in Australia see that and they say, okay, that's a little too crazy for me. But the conversation isn't for the people of Australia. It's for the people of America, the people in the country where I live. And me saying, this is why we don't tolerate mandates. Because they will expand, the government will seize power, and eventually you'll be like Australia, where people are held without due process. We don't tolerate that. I'll leave it there. Guys, go watch the Joe Rogan show with Josh Epps. Go watch the Robert Malone episode. There's a big protest happening in D.C. with Dr. Robert Malone and many other people, I believe on the 23rd. So pay attention to that stuff. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.